The arena lights didn't just dim, they seemed to be swallowed by a sudden, suffocating void. For a moment, 20,000 people in the dark sat in a silence so heavy it felt like pressure building behind the ears. Then, the opening guitar riff of Bad Reputation slashed through the air, not as a celebration, but as a warning. The reaction wasn't the usual pop of excitement. It was a guttural, confused roar, a mix of fear and awe. When Ronda Rousey stepped through the curtain, the atmosphere shifted from anticipation to genuine unease. She didn't march with the swagger of a champion looking for applause. She walked with the dead-eyed focus of a predator that had already decided on the kill, ignoring the pyrotechnics exploding around her. Michael Cole's voice cracked over the broadcast, the usual polished broadcast tone replaced by frantic urgency. "Oh my God, look at her eyes. She isn't here to compete, she's here to dismantle." The camera tracked her boots, stomping down the ramp, shaking the floorboards with every step. There was no smiling, no slapping hands with fans at ringside. She vaulted the barricade, bypassing the steel steps entirely, and slid into the ring like a viper returning to its nest. The commentary team fell silent for a beat, letting the visual breathe. She stood in the center of the ring, the lights glinting off the black leather of her gear, and stared directly into the hard camera. It wasn't a look of arrogance. It was a look of absolute, terrifying certainty. The air in the stadium grew thin. Everyone knew the script was about to be burned. This wasn't just an entrance. It was an invasion of reality into a world of theater. The match that followed wasn't a contest of athleticism. It was a slow-motion car crash that no one could look away from. The sound of bodies hitting the mat echoed like gunshots in the cavernous arena. Her opponent, desperate and cornered, had locked in a submission that defied anatomy, twisted, torque-heavy variation of a crossface that bent the neck at an angle that made the front row gasp audibly. The referee slid into position, his face a mask of panic, checking for the tap. The crowd rose to their feet, a sea of hands on heads, waiting for the inevitable slap of the mat. Pat McAfee screamed into his headset, "She has to quit. Look at the torque. Her neck is going to snap." But Ronda didn't move. She didn't flail. She didn't scream. She lay there, her face pressed against the canvas, her arm trapped, her spine contorted, and she simply stared. It was the kind of stillness that is more frightening than thrashing. The calm shock rippled through the audience. They weren't cheering anymore. They were whispering, asking the person next to them if this was supposed to happen. The hold tightened. The leverage increased. The referee hovered, hand trembling, ready to call for the bell to save a career. Yet in that suffocating grip, a smile crept across Rousey's face. Not a smile of joy, but a grimace of pure, unfiltered defiance. It was the refusal of a fighter who had forgotten that wrestling is a work, a woman who would rather let the bones snap than give the signal of surrender. The visual of her refusing to tap even like this, twisted into a question mark, became an instant, searing image burned into the history of the industry. When the referee finally called for the bell, it wasn't because of a submission. It was a stoppage born of mercy and confusion. The music didn't hit immediately. There was a lingering, awkward pause that usually signals something has gone wrong. The opponent released the hold, rolling away with a look of genuine concern, breaking character for a split second to check the damage. Ronda lay flat on her back, staring up at the stadium lights, her chest heaving, her arm dangling at a sickening angle. The commentary team spoke in hushed, somber tones, abandoning their catchphrases. "I don't know what we just witnessed," Graves muttered, his voice low. She didn't tap. She never tapped. But at what cost? The aftermath was chaotic. Medical personnel swarmed the ring, not with the usual scripted urgency, but with the frantic movements of professionals handling a trauma. The crowd didn't boo or cheer. They stood in a respectful, stunned silence, watching the baddest woman on the planet refuse the stretcher. She pushed the EMTs away with her good arm, stumbling to her feet. The visual was striking, a warrior broken but standing, surrounded by a swirling chaos of suits and doctors. She looked out at the sea of faces, her eyes glassy but fierce. There was no promo, no microphone grab. She just spat on the canvas, a visceral rejection of the pity being offered to her. It was a moment that blurred the lines so severely that the broadcast director cut to black early, leaving millions of viewers staring at their screens, wondering if they had just watched the end of a career or the birth of a legend. Behind the curtain, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and tension. The gorilla position, usually a place of high fives and debriefs, was dead silent. Producers stood with their headsets around their necks, staring at the monitors that replayed the sickening angle of the submission over and over. When Ronda walked through the curtain, clutching her arm, the hallway cleared. No one approached her. The blurred line between the character and the human being had terrified the locker room. Vince sat at his monitor, headphones off, watching her pass. He didn't yell, he didn't offer critique. He simply watched with the analytical gaze of a man who knew he had just bottled lightning, even if the bottle had shattered in the process. Reports began to leak immediately to the dirt sheets. Backstage heat, they called it, going into business for herself. But the roster knew the truth. It wasn't arrogance. It was a physiological inability to accept defeat. In the trainer's room, the mood was somber. Family members waiting in the back, husbands, wives, children, watched with wide eyes. This wasn't the sanitized violence they were used to. This was the ugly, gritty reality of combat sports bleeding into their world. Social media was already melting down. Screenshots of her twisted arms circulating with captions declaring her insane or iconic. The narrative had shifted instantly. She wasn't just a wrestler anymore. She was an anomaly, a problem that the corporate machine couldn't solve because she refused to play by the rules of self-preservation. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from the Rousey camp only deepened the intrigue. The moment she refused to tap became more than just a match highlight. It became a psychological study. Fans analyzed the footage frame by frame, looking for the work, but finding only the grim reality of a woman willing to be broken. It forced the wrestling world to ask a difficult question. What happens when you put a real fighter in a scripted world and she refuses to read the final page? The legacy of that night wasn't the championship or the win-loss record. It was the chilling realization that for Ronda Rousey, the tap-out didn't exist in her vocabulary. In the end, the twist wasn't that she survived. The twist was that she liked it. That moment of pain, that split second where the bone bowed under the pressure, was the only time she felt truly alive in a ring of predetermined outcomes. The calm shock that had silenced the arena was actually a mirror. The audience was horrified because they saw a human being pushed to the brink. Ronda was calm because she was finally home. Refusal to tap wasn't stubbornness. It was a statement that in a world of fake finishes, her pain was the only thing that was real. And that is why, even years later, when the lights go out and the guitar riff hits, people still feel that twinge of fear. They know that the woman walking down the ramp doesn't know how to stop.